Flowing through some of the world's most isolated and unforgiving terrains, these rivers are as perilous as they are remote. From treacherous rapids to rivers surrounded by untamed wilderness. Join me for today's video. We're counting down the top 15 most remote and dangerous rivers in the world. Starting with number 15. The Tarcoles River, which is known locally as the Rio Grande de Tarcoles, flows for about 69 miles or 111 kilometers from the mountains of the Central Valley to the Gulf of Nicoya along the Pacific coast. It's famous for its unique ecosystem and the wild, untamed landscape around it, but no matter how beautiful it may be, there's a danger hidden beneath the surface. That's because it's home to a large population of American crocodiles, with several hundred thought to be there, with some reaching over 15 feet or 4.5 meters long. The river is said to have one of the highest concentrations of crocodiles per square mile anywhere on Earth, and while this has made it a popular trail to access and have created a haven for various other species of wildlife. This means, though, that if you were to encounter a dangerous situation somewhere in here, immediate help would be unlikely, and the inaccessibility of large portions of the river makes rescue efforts pretty tough. It's not remote along the entire course, though, as it passes through several towns and cities, including the urban areas around San Jose. The water picks up large amounts of pollution. It is, as a result, one of the most contaminated rivers in Costa Rica, with pollutants such as industrial waste, sewage, plastics, and agricultural runoff. In total, it's thought to drain as much as 67% of the country's total untreated organic and inorganic waste, which is a real concern. This, of course, harms the river's ecosystem, but it also poses health risks to those who live near it or rely on it. In a country that in recent years relies heavily on ecotourism, this is an issue that initiatives are trying to reverse. But for now, means that wherever along the river you are, it's definitely flowing through rural Alaska. It is, though, a lifeline to various indigenous communities, such as the Yupik people, who have relied on it for centuries for transportation and fishing. The river goes through the heart of Alaska's wilderness, past forests and mountains, and with no road networks connecting those areas to the rest of the state, the river is often the only accessible route. Especially in winter when it freezes over and becomes a natural ice road. Using the frozen river is, though, potentially dangerous because unexpected temperature changes and shifting ice conditions can suddenly see it turn back into water. The river's level, when it's flowing, can also rise quickly due to rain or melting snow, leading to some flash floods. And these surges make boating and fishing particularly risky, as powerful currents can easily capsize small vessels. The extreme remoteness of the river means that there's very little chance of rescue if there's an emergency, and many sections are in places where cell phones or radio coverage is limited. The unpredictable weather, including sudden snowstorms, extreme cold, and high river, is one of the longest in South America, and the fourth largest in the world in terms of the volume of water that passes along it, covering a distance of over 1,300 miles or 2,100 kilometers through Venezuela and Colombia, across dense rainforests, savannas, and wetlands before reaching the Atlantic Ocean. Traveling through remote areas of the Amazon basin, the Orinoco is undoubtedly a beautiful river, and one with a great cultural importance, so much so that its name translates to mean place to paddle. But you might want to think twice before you consider actually doing that. Much of this has to do with its extreme remoteness, as most of the river flows through isolated regions with very little infrastructure. The mouth of the river was actually first documented by Columbus on his third voyage, but it would be a further 453 years until people made their way to its source, which is close to the border with Brazil. Many stretches of the Orinoco can be reached by boat or small plane, and the difficulty of navigation in this uncharted territory limits opportunities for tourism and travel. Currents and whirlpools that appear in certain parts of the river are an extra danger, capable of capsizing smaller boats and posing a risk for anyone attempting to swim. Beyond the physical dangers of the Orinoco, it is home to a large number of dangerous species too, such as caimans, piranhas, and anacondas, all of which pose risks to humans. The jungles surrounding the river are dangerous too, with jaguars, poisonous snakes, and huge insects, making any exploration beyond the riverbank a pretty risky one. Number 12. The Murray River in Australia. The Murray River, which is Australia's longest river, flows over 1,500 miles or 2,400 kilometers from the Australian Alps through New South Wales, Victoria, and South Australia, before finally reaching the Southern Ocean. Its length means that it's one of the country's most important rivers, with its waters sustaining communities, agriculture, and unique ecosystems across huge regions. Though parts of the Murray pass through towns, large sections of the river wind through logs and shifting sandbanks create risks for swimmers, boaters, and fishers. The river's appearance can be deceiving, as it may seem calm on the surface, but have powerful currents underneath. People who are unfamiliar with the river's quirks have been known to get caught in these currents, leading to accidents, some of them fatal. Seasonal flooding, too, then adds to those dangers, with sudden water surges and swollen banks turning calm waters into turbulent currents. When there's heavy rainfall, entire sections of the river can flood the surrounding plains, creating temporary wetlands that are difficult to cross. Then there's the range of wildlife, which can be dangerous in their own right. After all, this is Australia we're talking about. The river's banks are, for example, the perfect habitat for snakes, like the highly venomous eastern brown snake and the red-bellied black snake, both of which are commonly found in Australia and often hide near riverbanks. It's perhaps no surprise then that the Murray River has historically been a major barrier to travel and trade over land, with so many risks. Sanctuary in central Peru. Stretching 4 miles or 6.5 kilometers, it's unlike any other river in the world, as its waters reach near boiling temperatures. The river was only really known about to the outside world relatively recently because it's in an extremely remote part of the Amazon forest. You can get there by a multi-day journey which includes boat rides, hiking through the jungle, and careful navigation with guides who know the region. But with no direct roads or infrastructure leading to it, the journey here is challenging, even for experienced travelers. And of course, this means that visitors are far from medical assistance or emergency services. The journey there may see you coming face to face with venomous snakes, spiders, and insects, and the trails are often overgrown, muddy, and difficult to use. There's also high humidity, sudden rainstorms, and limited supplies in the rainforest, where the dense canopy can hide paths, making it easy to lose your way. The main danger is, of course, the river itself, where the water temperature can range from 113 to 212 degrees Fahrenheit. Though, the river's temperatures are still a mystery. Unlike other sites like it around the world, the boiling river is not near any active volcano or tectonic plate boundary, which are usually responsible for heating underground water. Scientists think that deep underground fault lines could allow geothermal energy to rise closer to the surface, heating the river's waters to such levels. But for now, this is just a theory, and it's yet to be proved. Number 10. The Kali Gandaki River in Nepal. The Kali Gandaki River is one of the most important and revered rivers in the Himalayas. Named after the goddess Kali, it begins in the Tibetan Plateau near the Nepal-China border and flows southward across Nepal, carving out the famous Kali Gandaki Gorge, which is one of the deepest gorges in the world, with 2 massive Himalayan mountains on either side. Eventually, it then goes into India, where it joins up with the Ganges. This, then, is extremely remote, with tricky terrain all around. Steep cliffs are common alongside the river, and most villages along the route are isolated. The Annapurna transforming it into a powerful, fast-moving force that pushes aside anything. Landslides here happen all the time, particularly in the steep valleys surrounding the river. With the river originating from glaciers and snow-fed rivers high up in the Himalayas, the waters may well be fresh, but they're also icy all year round, meaning you definitely don't want to find yourself swimming in there. Even with all the clear dangers, people visit this river from around the world because of its place as a sacred river in Hindu and Buddhist traditions. This is mainly because it's believed to be home to the Shalagrim stones, which are black ammonite fossils dating back millions of years, and are seen as symbolic representations of the Hindu god Vishnu, so are collected by pilgrims who make the difficult journey to the river's banks as a sign of their commitment. Number 9. Rio Tinto in Spain. The name Rio Tinto is more commonly associated with the large mining company, but the corporation was actually named after a river in Spain. Flowing through a region of Andalusia, it's about 62 makes it inhospitable to most forms of life, with the only things that live in there being microbial life. The river's remote location in the mountains of Andalusia further adds to its dangers. It may not be as isolated as others, but the Rio Tinto runs through uninhabited areas, making it difficult to access. Much of the river passes through hilly terrain, and much of which still has the remains of ancient and modern mining operations, which create a surreal and barren atmosphere. The effects of the mining also mean there's very little vegetation growing in the toxic, mineral-rich soil, and there are further dangers that have been left behind too. There are countless abandoned mine shafts and structures along the riverbanks, many of which are unstable and potentially dangerous to those who don't know that they're there. The area's history of mining has also led to severe environmental damage, with leftover waste and toxins from operations making the acidity and contamination of the river even worse. While some areas are accessible to visitors, safety warnings are everywhere to remind people to include forests, steppes, and tundra. Most of the land around the river is uninhabited by people, with only a few small towns and settlements along its banks, and these outposts are almost entirely dependent on the river for transportation and supplies. Many of these communities can only be reached by boat in the summer or by ice roads during the cold Siberian winters, which are dangerous because of thin ice. The river experiences extreme seasonal variations, so in winter, temperatures can plummet to -22 degrees Fahrenheit or -30 degrees Celsius or lower, causing the river to freeze over entirely. In the summer, when the ice melts, the Yenisei transforms into a powerful free-flowing river, with heavy rainfall and glacial melt from the Sayan and Tanuola mountains, having the potential to cause flash floods and dangerously strong currents. Unfortunately, even though it's so remote and the largest river to end in the Arctic, this is another river that's been hugely impacted by human activity, particularly by industrial pollution from Norilsk, which is a large industrial city north of the river. Waste from facilities 100 kilometers through Southeast Asia, in countries like China, Myanmar, and Thailand, before finally emptying into the Andaman Sea. The river is a lifeline for isolated communities, but there's a number of dangers along the way. Cutting a path through steep, narrow gorges, dense forests, and mountainous landscapes, this makes access to the river pretty difficult and restricts movement for local communities, many of whom live in traditional villages that are only accessible by river. In areas where the river forms a border between Myanmar and Thailand, these regions have very few residents, and in Myanmar, many of these areas remain off-limits or inaccessible. The river's remoteness means that there's little infrastructure or emergency support available, and those who live or travel along its banks must be self-reliant. The river is seen as dangerous because of its strong currents, rapids, and seasonal fluctuations. It descends quickly from the Tibetan Plateau in China, picking up speed as it carves through Myanmar's mountainous regions. These fast-moving waters, often with rapids, remains important for the communities and ecosystems it supports. Its free-flowing nature, which is rare for rivers in Asia, as they often are dammed, means it sustains fish populations, endangered species, and culturally rich riverside communities who view it as a sacred and essential resource. Number 6. The Rio Santo Domingo, Mexico. The Rio Santo Domingo in Mexico is a lesser-known river that winds through the Sierra Madre del Sur mountain range in the state of Oaxaca. This is one of the most remote regions in Mexico, and the river has become known for its pristine waters, narrow canyons, and dense tropical forests. But this certainly isn't a place to visit without serious preparation. Located far from any cities or towns, the river is difficult to get to in the first place, with very few established roads leading to its banks. The journey to the river involves long drives through winding mountain roads and in some areas hikes through dense jungles. This means that the river has remained largely untouched by development, and there are very few people in the region, medical or emergency services in case of accidents. Even for nearby communities, assistance can be hours away, and in the case of tourists or adventurers exploring the area, help may be out of reach entirely. And of course, cell phone reception is generally poor, and the dense jungle and mountainous terrain make it challenging for any rescue efforts. It is a special river in South America, though, because it hasn't been affected by humans too much, and the water supports the surrounding forests, which themselves are risky too. There are hundreds of dangerous species in there, like venomous snakes, insects, and jaguars, and while it's rare you have to deal with one, the lack of medical assistance if something goes wrong means that you've got to be aware of what's lurking around every corner. Number 5. The Amur River, Russia and China. The Amur River, also known as the Heilongjiang in Chinese, is one of Asia's longest rivers, running for around 2,700 miles, or 4,300 kilometers, along the border between Russia and China, before flowing into the Sea of Okhotsk. This river, which forms in transportation. Seasonal changes here are what make this river particularly dangerous and unpredictable. In winter, temperatures can plummet, often reaching as low as -40 degrees Fahrenheit or -40 degrees Celsius. This frozen river is then used by locals and traders as an ice road to transport goods between remote communities. During the summer, when the ice melts, the Amur becomes a powerful, free-floating river with strong currents. In recent years, extreme flooding along the river has become more common, and these floodwaters can spread for miles. The river and its tributaries also support diverse wildlife, including endangered species such as the Amur leopard and Siberian tiger, which rely on the surrounding forest. Brown bears, wolves, and various large fish species also live in the area, making encounters with dangerous wildlife a genuine risk for those who get too close to the riverbanks or deep into the surrounding landscape. Number 4. The Sepik River in Papua New Guinea. The Sepik River, which for locals, the river is a natural highway, serving as the main means of transportation, especially given the lack of infrastructure. And many communities along the river have limited or no access to modern conveniences like medical facilities, electricity, or clean water sources, making them highly dependent on the river for resources and connectivity. This river is as dangerous as it is remote, with a range of wildlife that you'll want to keep your distance from. It's got large populations of saltwater and freshwater crocs, and encounters with those crocs are common, especially during fishing or when collecting water. And this river abounds with local legends and stories, often reminding people to approach the river's edges with extreme caution. Floodwaters with this river can inundate villages, destroying homes and crops and displacing entire communities, and it's almost impossible to navigate the water during those times, as submerged obstacles like fallen trees and shifting sand creates hazards. And if that's not enough, the Sepik is a hotbed of diseases, with mosquitoes 700 kilometers from its source in the highlands of the East African Rift to its mouth on the Atlantic Ocean. This river is the deepest in the world, with some sections reaching depths of over 720 feet or 220 meters as it flows through dense rainforests, remote villages, and rough terrain. The size of the river allows it to discharge nearly 1.4 million cubic feet or 40,000 cubic meters of water per second, making it one of the largest river systems in terms of water volume, and this water helps support one of the planet's most biologically diverse regions. The surrounding rainforest here is a hot spot, home to gorillas, forest elephants, and rare birds like the Congo peafowl. But even though it's so long, it is incredibly remote, flowing through areas of the Congo Basin, which is the world's second largest rainforest after the Amazon. The river passes through some of the most isolated and hard-to-reach regions on the African continent, with most of it being dense jungle with little infrastructure. This isolation means that during the rainy season, the Congo River swells too, flooding nearby forests and communities. The banks become unstable with muddy conditions and submerged vegetation, making navigation even more difficult. And of course, adding to the river's danger are wildlife species like crocodiles and hippos, which can both be highly aggressive and are commonly found in and around the river. Hippos, in particular, are very territorial and have been known to attack boats, posing serious threats to local fishermen and travelers. And the river is also home to numerous species of fish, including the predatory Goliath tigerfish, which is one of the largest and most dangerous freshwater fish in the world. But for communities along the river, diseases like malaria, typhoid, and cholera are common, with the river itself becoming a breeding ground for waterborne diseases, especially in the wet season when flooding spreads contaminated water into the surrounding areas. Number 2. Yarlung Tsangpo, Tibet. The Yarlung Tsangpo, often referred to as Trans-Himalayan Range, has a few people living there, with just a couple of settlements and very limited infrastructure. The people who live along its banks are mostly Tibetan herders and farmers who have adapted to life in this challenging high-altitude environment. But the river itself is ferocious and unpredictable. As it descends down the Tibetan plateau, it picks up some serious speed, rushing through narrow gorges and creating powerful rapids. The descent here is so fast that it creates intense water pressure and dangerous whirlpools, posing some serious hazards. The Yarlung Tsangpo Grand Canyon, which is both deeper and longer than the Grand Canyon in the United States, has rapids that are practically impassable, with sheer rock walls and turbulent currents that can easily swallow vessels. The landscape and heavy rainfall combine to create frequent landslides, which can block parts of the river, forming temporary dams that could burst suddenly, releasing massive floods downstream. The high altitudes and thin air, of course, of the Tibetan Plateau pose further health risks to outsiders towards in a horseshoe shape before emptying into the Pacific. It has an unusual course, which has been shaped by volcanic activity and geological shifts. The river meanders in a near semicircle, which geologists believe was caused by tectonic movements that redirected its flow over thousands of years. This odd shape has led to the formation of natural salt flats and mineral deposits along the banks, and this means that parts of the Loa contain high mineral concentrations, especially copper, and is why some of Chile's largest copper mining operations are nearby. The river's also been important to historical cultures, and it's where a number of petroglyphs and ancient archaeological sites have been found. The Loa petroglyphs, for example, were carved by the indigenous Atacameño people, who relied on the river's waters and depict llamas, figures, and mysterious symbols. One of the main dangers of the river is the risk of flash floods. Now, despite the dry climate, the Loa is prone to flooding, especially during the summer months, when the Andean snow and ice melt and increase the flow.